I've got a captive crowd, I do want to tell you all a couple things about the museum, first of all, before I introduce our guests. We have a new exhibit that just opened on Tuesday. That's my little billboard. It's historic Harley Davidsons, but they're historic Harleys. We've got one from World War II that gave rise to the popularity of not only Harley Davidsons, but motorcycles in general. Apparently the guys came home and remembered their fun times in Europe riding on those motorcycles. So although we're not open today, I do hope that you're upstairs to see the exhibit because we are so very proud of it. It's a collection from Davidson. If you're from Wabash, you're familiar with them. Our museum has been open for about 5 years now, and we're just so proud of you. If you how many people have been through the museum? Okay, so those of you that I'm not listening to, raise your hand. Please promise me that you'll try back and see our museum because it really is fantastic. We have a very special World War II veteran here with us.
There's some seats that's
I have some postcards up here. Oh, they're right here. One of just my favorite people, Burl Steller, is here tonight. He served in Leyte, and he's probably the only person you'll ever meet who had dengue fever and actually survived it. And I mean, I've read about dengue fever in novels and things, but didn't know that there was anybody that survived it. We actually have a postcard of Burl. If you look in the background at his shadow, you'll see somebody very, very familiar. So I'm going to pass these out so everybody can have one of those, because we just think Burl is such a special guy. I'm so glad to have him with us tonight. If you'll have and we also have Arlene Cole, who came from, Arlene, where did you come from Warsaw. Your brother, was on the USS Indianapolis. And he was 3 and I was 16. And he did not survive.
No.
He did not
the
survive.
ship, but they picked him up and put him on the USS Doyle, and they military funeral. 20 boys plus him, 21. I found that out in 1995. I had that in
Indianapolis. Well, will you do me a favor and make sure that you ask Clarence about the Tippy Dance Hall when we're done here, when we have our question and answer period? Because you're from Warsaw, you know about the Tippy Canoe Dance Hall. Oh, no, you don't? Okay. We have Dave Hoffer to thank for the whole evening tonight. He is the principal at North, and it is a history buff. He taught history for a long time, right before he came to Northfield, and is such a great asset to our community, to our county. Thank you so much for your passion about World War II. He's really encouraged a class at Northfield. And I don't know if you'll talk about it or not, but he's putting these students in touch with people like Margie Stewart Johnson from Wabash County and Burl Steller from Wabash County, these heroes who live right in our own backyard. And it's an opportunity that, well, we all appreciate because we're all here. So Dave called me and said, these guys are coming, would you be interested? I said, oh yeah, we would be interested. So it's thanks to him that I got to have dinner with my new friends, Clarence and Don and Kim. And I'm going to hand it over now to Dave. Thank you.
I'll keep this really short because you're not here to see me. All right, you can come out to Northfield and see me any day. You're here to see these three. I guess I'll take just a quick step back and explain how this link even began. I'll never forget, as a history teacher, I always had students that would come up to me and say, Mr. Hofford, I'm related to Abraham Lincoln. I said, guys, no you're not. No living descendants, you know, the last guy died in 1920, whatever. You know what, we would go through all of this. And one day, we were in the middle of World War II, and we had this project going on where our students were pen pals back and forth with Pearl Harbor survivors. And all of a sudden, one of the students came up to me and he said, Mr. Hofford, my grandfather was on the USS Indianapolis. And I remember looking at him, and you know, the Indianapolis was kind of, I don't want to say obscure, but it definitely wasn't in the history books, especially our history books today. History books today go over Pearl Harbor, and unfortunately, the next page is the atomic bomb. And boom, we're into the 1950s. We forget so much that happened in the 1940s. We forget so much that happened during World War II, and so much like the Indianapolis gets skipped over. And I looked at this young man and I said, you know what, give me your grandfather's name. And I was going to come back to him the next day and explain the whole story of his grandfather, you know, do a little bit of internet, Google searching, whatever you want to call it. And he gave me his grandfather's name as Miles Spooner. And sure enough, I Googled it right in there, and boom, his grandfather was on the Indianapolis. He was one of the men that was saved, and when you talk about the plane today, he was one that was put on the wingtip of the plane. And I went back and I started researching a little bit more of this myself, and I knew I had to get a book. I grabbed Fatal Voyage by a guy named Dan Kurzman, and I read through that book very quickly. And I thought, you know what, this is an amazing, amazing story. Somehow I have to link my kids to this. Somehow I have to find information for the young man that was in my class especially. He wanted to know more about his grandfather. His grandfather passed away, didn't really share very much about his story. And so we started digging a little bit more, and they had a survivors organization, which both of these guys are active members of. I contacted their chairperson, he gave me a list of names, and before you know it, we were contacting all the survivors that were left. These were two of the guys that responded back. And responded back right away, and I remember one of the first things he told me was, you guys know about Tippy Dance Hall up there? Our kids just went nuts because here was, and this was the great thing about the link between the two generations. We found out very quickly that students from this generation and World War II veterans have a lot in common. They love showing each other their tattoos. They did, and they had so much more in common than we could ever imagine. It broke down all kinds of barriers. And these guys, again, are amazing guys. I can't wait for them to share their story. I can't wait for Kim to share, again, their story. So, like I said, I will shut up now, and I will let them go ahead and take over the presentation. But thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Tracy. The Wabash County History Museum, it is top-notch. Not being from this community, I was blown away the first time that I walked into these doors. What a community asset to have something right here in Wabash that we can be so proud of and preserves our history. So many communities don't have that. So again, thank you, and I will now be quiet.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, well we can project a little bit. How many of you were here this morning? Here at the school this morning and saw the program? A few of you. You guys, you probably don't remember it this morning, but you were there. Okay. So if I ask any questions, those of you who raise your hands, you're not allowed to answer. Okay? You already know. You already saw the program. And you guys were there, so you don't get to answer it.
I don't know nothing. I didn't see nothing.
While they were talking, while Tracy was, while Dave was talking, he was talking about Tippy Dance Hall, Don turned to Clarence and he goes, "What were you doing at Tippy Dance Hall?" What'd you tell him? Browsing. Married man. Okay, well we're gonna start off. Need these lights down, please. All right. Can everybody see me okay? We don't have a spotlight here. This is all right. All right. We're gonna talk about World War II, and the first thing I always ask, and especially when I'm talking to high school students, is when did World War II begin? Can somebody tell me? When?
1939.
What happened in 1939?
Hitler invaded Poland.
Right on. Ooh. You get an A. You tell your history teacher I passed you. Okay. When did the United States enter the war? You don't get an answer. Do you know, sweetheart? What happened in 1941? Pearl Harbor, exactly. So page up one, please, Joe. Go ahead and push the up there. This is a picture of that morning, just after 8 a.m. on December 7th, 1941. Japan flew some of their Japanese Zeros, their airplanes, and came over and bombed us in Pearl Harbor at our naval base there. This front ship right here is the USS West Virginia. The one behind it is the USS Tennessee. Down here at the very bottom, there's a sailor getting rescued there. And that is when the United States entered the war. Well, we're going to fast forward a few years to the end of the war, and we are going to go to 1945. Okay, next. Down. And we're going to talk about this ship right here, the USS Indianapolis. CA-35 heavy cruiser for the U.S. Navy. Now, this ship was commissioned in 1932, and it was Roosevelt's ship of state. It was also Admiral Spruance's flagship of the Fifth Fleet. So it had a pretty distinguished history. The timeline that we're talking about, though, it's been taken over by a man named Captain Charles McVeigh III. Go to the next picture. This is his photograph here. Wonderful man. I really wish I could have met him. His subordinates respected him, obeyed him because he knew how to be a good governing body. He also knew how to please his superiors. And his superiors trusted him enough to assign him a very, very top secret mission. What had happened is in March of 1945, they were engaged in Okinawa when they were hit by a kamikaze. Does everybody know what a kamikaze is? All you guys, what is it?
Suicide.
Suicide what? Plane, that's right. It was a Japanese plane. They were so desperate by that time that the pilots of those planes would take off knowing full well that they were never going to land. They were going to become, in essence, a flying missile and go and attack the ships. They were hit on the port side on March 31st, 1945 in Okinawa. And that crippled, it did knock out 2 screws, is that correct?
Yes,
2 of the 4? And so they ended up limping back. I believe it killed 9 of your crew members, correct?
There maybe a little more.
Right.
And there most of them down in the hole where they mess hall.
Where they were having, some and they limped back to the United States where they are under repairs for a few weeks. And then they were in San Francisco when Captain McVeigh was given this order for this top secret mission. He was told that he was going to be loaded with something, that he was to get to the island of Tinian over in the South Pacific at top speed. And he was told, we can't tell you what it is you're taking, but every day sooner that you get it there, you will shorten the war by that much. So, go ahead, next picture, Joe. Anybody recognize that?
Big boy.
Almost. Not big boy.
Little boy.
Little boy, exactly.
Yeah.
I get them mixed up too. The other one, the one that they dropped 3 days later on Nagasaki, was a big fat round one. He was called Fat Man. This is Little Boy. This was the shell casing that was loaded on board the ship. It was brought on in a big wooden crate. It was 5 feet wide, 5 feet tall, 15 feet long. It was the casing for the atomic bomb. The other thing that was brought in was a big black metal canister about 18 inches long. It took 2 guys to carry it. And they took that into one of the officers' staterooms aboard the ship and welded it to the floor. And the captain was told, if anything happens to this ship en route, and you guys are sinking, that crate and that canister get the lifeboats first before any people. Anybody know what's in the canister? What would be in that canister? Uranium, that's right. Uranium-235. Actually, it was half of the world's supply, the fissionable supply at that time. In 1945 was aboard that ship. Like I said, the captain wasn't told what it was. The boys sure didn't know what it was. And you thought you knew what it was, didn't you?
No, we had no idea. Secret weapon.
So you didn't know it was a secret weapon. You thought it
No,
was...
you could tell me today what it's done, I still don't know.
You still don't know what an atom bomb is. No, but they did a lot of rumors, amongst themselves. They knew not to approach it because it was under 24-hour guard by the Marines that were on board. There were a contingent of 39 Marines on board the ship. And they were told to shoot on sight on approach. If anybody approached that, that's how guarded this was. So, of course, the scuttlebutt's flying. On board that ship. These guys are going, holy moly, what do you think's in the box? What do you think's in the box? And I think it's girls. One of my favorites I read was they thought it was scented toilet paper from MacArthur. Big gray bowl. So anyway, so they're told to take this thing over to Tinian, like I said. Okay, next picture. Now this is a picture of the airplane, the B-29. Anybody know who that young man is? Paul W. Tibbets, that's right. He's the pilot of the Enola Gay. Dropped the bomb over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. We entered the nuclear age, changed the world forever. And 3 days later, when we dropped on a second one on Nagasaki, ended the war. And until the day he died, he did not regret what he had done. He
I
said,
didn't get his name.
Pardon?
What was his name?
Paul Warfield Tibbets. Paul W. Tibbets. He actually lived just up in Cincinnati, not too far. So go ahead, next picture. This is a photograph of this is a photograph of the second bomb. It looks very similar to what the first one was. This was the only one I could track down. They said that when you saw this in color and in person, that from the atomic particles and all the fission going on and all of the reactions in the atmosphere, that this thing was like exploding rainbows. Is the only way they can describe it. It was just, the colors were just incredible. But what was happening on the ground was absolutely horrific. Go ahead, next one. This used to be a city. This is one bomb. This was the powerful destruction that they were able to wreak in one drop. And the difference between this bomb and the conventional bombs that we've been dropping throughout the whole war. Go ahead, next one. Oh, this is Nagasaki 3 days later. Point out this is a person. That's a person. There, and like I said, after that second one, Japan said, we can't fight this. We have nothing. Now the difference between the atomic bombs and a regular bomb, the conventional bombs we've been dropping during the Cold War, were when they opened the bomb bay doors and the bomb, it actually detonated 1,800 feet in the air. It's called a hypocenter. And that blast would then force downwards with the radioactive particles and the heat and the light and just sweep across the land. So about for 1 mile radius from the hypocenter, nothing lived. Very few structures survived. Has anybody ever been to Japan? Has anybody been over there and seen the A-bomb dome in Hiroshima? Pretty powerful, haunting place. I've been there several times. My dad used to live in Japan, so I took every chance I could to get over there. On one trip I was there and I decided, I wanted to see where the hypocenter was, because they were actually aiming for just a little bit north of that A-bomb dome. They were aiming for a bridge called the Ottaway Bridge. And, bomb sighting with the Norden and everything they had back then wasn't exactly, precise like it is now. And they hit about a block and a half, 2 blocks off is where it hit. So I went walking, and I went, to find where this place was. And I found it was just on a little side street of a parking garage. And there was a sidewalk, and there's a little pillar probably about as tall as this podium here. And on the top, it just had a plaque that said, 1,800 feet above the place you're standing right now, August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped. And they very much slanted to, and we don't know why, but Pearl Harbor. But anyway, and it was really eerie to be standing in that place because, I knew the history, and I looked straight up and I realized that was the moment the world changed, and that right there where I was standing had been a hospital that instantly was no more, instantly disintegrated. Okay, go ahead. This was a picture that actually Dave Hoffert has in one of his collections in the school. He has a World War II area set up in his library. If you ever get a chance, go over there. He's got a piece of USS Arizona. He's got letters, pictures, documents, really great stuff. And one of the photographs he has is this one that I've been using in the program. And they found this throughout all of the city of both Nagasaki and Hiroshima. These are flash burns from the light and the heat of the bomb. If they were outside the radius where things were killed and you were able to survive, if you're wearing a pattern on your shirt, it burned through to your skin. But I also want you to notice how torn up her skin is there too. She probably didn't survive very much longer after this. Okay, go ahead. So, like I said, they left San Francisco July 16th. They made top speed. You actually set a speed record to Hawaii, didn't you? Is it still standing today?
We sent it all the way to Tinian.
Oh, all the way. I thought it was just on Honolulu.
I
Okay.
think it's all the way to Tinian. I
Yeah.
can't swear, but I think it's from Tinian.
You weren't there or anything, were you?
Well, I was a passenger.
That's true. Got to Pearl Harbor, dropped off a few, picked up a few greenies, came over here to the Marianas, and they got to the island of Tinian, dropped off their cargo. So they dropped off the atomic bomb. They proceeded just a little bit south to the island of Guam. And it was there that Captain McVeigh received his next routing orders. He was to go from Guam to Leyte. Now, you were in Leyte, sir, is that right? When were you there?
45.
What, and right till the end of the war? Okay, so they were headed toward you. They were going to go there for gunnery practice because in a few months, if this bomb did not remember at the time, we'd only done one test, the Trinity test in White Sands, New Mexico. They had blown one atomic bomb and it far exceeded their expectations, but we didn't even know if this one was even going to detonate. We didn't know, and we also didn't know the destructive force on the city, or Japan would even surrender. So we were making plans to invade the homeland of Japan a few months later. Now the problem with that, if the war had not ended, and this is why I'm so grateful to these young men for what they did, for delivering that bomb, is because they had already pre-ordered 1 million body bags. Because they expected that to be an absolute bloodbath when they went on those islands. Japanese didn't give up. They weren't the kind of surrender. They were captured, but if they could avoid that, they'd kill themselves before they were captured. And they, at that time, they were training a homeland army. They were training their children as young as 4 years old how to pull the pin on a grenade if they could get next to a serviceman. They were teaching the people in their nursing homes how to bayonet because they were going to, kill as many as they could and then kill themselves. It was going to be a really, really bloody situation. I am grateful for that bomb delivery. So he was told to head over to Leyte for gunnery practice, and he asked for an escort. Now, an escort is a destroyer. In Indianapolis was a cruiser, really good at speed, really good at shooting, but wasn't equipped with sonar. You guys know what sonar is? What is sonar? Were you guys here this morning? What is it?
Sound waves that show you the
What does it detect on the ship? It tells the ship. But what does it see in the water? Submarines. Exactly. It detects submarines. Indianapolis was not equipped with submarines, nor was it equipped with a lot of armor, because it was a cruiser with really high speed, and it was a treaty cruiser, correct?
Treaty cruise.
Which meant that it had to be a lower
Armament.
armament. There's the word. I'm going to sit down. And anyway, so they asked for a destroyer escort, and he was denied. He was told, no, you don't need it. The route that you're going along is safe. What they didn't tell him was that they knew where 3 Japanese submarines were along that route. They also didn't tell him that 3 days earlier, the USS Underhill had been sunk along that very same route. Now, a lot of people don't understand why this happened, why they sent him out there blind, and Captain McVeigh didn't know for years either. And what it was is we had cracked the Japanese code. We knew their communications back and forth, and we didn't want them to know that we knew that for fear that they would change it up and we would be blind again. So they sent him out there not telling him this because they didn't think that he was of high enough rank to know this information they gotten. So they basically sent him out blind. He was told, though, in his orders, to zigzag at his discretion. That means he takes the ship this way for a little ways, that way for a little ways, this way for a little ways, literally zigzagging. And their thought back then during World War II was that in zigzagging, if you get spotted while you're going one direction by somebody in the air or by an enemy, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going that way. They don't quite know where you're going. They also thought that if you were shot at, that doing this kind of a movement was an evasive maneuver. Well, the problem is, they always shot more than one torpedo, they always shot them out in the fan over a bigger area, and you're moving much too slow to actually be outmaneuvering anything. And the majority of ships in World War II were sunk for zigzagging. Didn't make a difference. So he was told to do that at his discretion. What that meant is that if the weather conditions were right, meaning there's no moonlight at night, no visibility, stormy, whatever, you can go in a straight line, because as you all know, the quickest way between 2 points is a straight line. You don't have to zigzag. So July 29, 1945, about 10 p.m., Captain McVeigh makes his final walk around the ship and his assessment, determines everything. And it's dark, and it's pitch black dark that night, because there's a storm coming, and there's cloud cover all over, there's no moon, and he says, cease zigzagging, but wake me if anything changes. And he retires for the night in his room. So the men are going along, and just a few minutes before midnight, a few miles down the road, down the waterway, there happens to be a submarine under the water there, called the I-58. Go ahead, next one, Jeff. This is the I-58 from the Japanese Tinian group out of Korea, Japan, and it's led by a man named Motsushita Hashimoto. Next picture. This is a picture of Motsushita. He's been on the ship, or on his submarine, for the whole entire length of the war, ever since 1941, and he's never had a kill. He's never sunk in. He's one of the last few submarines operating in the Japanese Navy. He's so decimated. And he knew that his country was going to lose. He knew that, but he still wanted to go home honorably, having done something for his emperor, who they considered a god at the time. So he was in the area of Indianapolis, didn't know that Indy was out there, but they heard something that sounded a little bit odd. So he decided to surface and do a periscope sweep up top of the water. And when he did that, right at that same moment, the clouds parted, the moon came out, and there was Indianapolis in his sights. Just every bad occurrence happened all at once. He saw the ship, and he got real excited real fast, and he repositioned his submarine. And from approximately 6 miles away, he shot out 6 torpedoes. Like I said, go ahead, next picture. And just a few minutes after midnight, the first one hit right here, starboard side on the bow, ripped it clean off, just as easily as if you would take a corner of a notebook paper and tear it off. A few moments later, and it also nailed a storage with 3,500 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel right there. The second one hits a few seconds later in the ammunition storage, and everything starts exploding. Now, when that first one hit and opened up the front end of the ship, it basically created a funnel, because that night in the South Pacific in July, it is ungodly hot. So hot that they were sailing in what's called condition yoke modified. They had all of the underneath portholes, doorways, everything open just to get some airflow through that ship, because it was like an oven down there. So they were sailing in that condition yoke modified. When you rip off the front end of the ship, you just start scooping up water, especially if you're traveling at 17 knots like they were. When all the blasts happened with the second torpedo, it knocked out the communications in Radio 1, and it also knocked out communications from the captains from the bridge down to the engine room. He could not tell them to stop the engines, so they wouldn't keep scooping up so fast, and Indianapolis started to sink. Now, have any of you guys seen the movie Titanic? How long did it take that ship? Nobody can answer if you were there this morning. How long did it take the Titanic to sink?
2.5 minutes.
How long?
2.5.
Titanic? 2 hours and 40 minutes. Indianapolis? How long? Huh?
12 minutes.
Right quick is right. Too quick for you guys, huh? Yeah. 12 minutes. From the very first torpedo to no more ship above water, 12 minutes. Needless to say, from the first blast, there were some men who were killed instantly, especially in the forward bow part is where the black gunnery crew was kept. And those men were instantly killed. No black men survived around the ship. They were also, were they the stewards? And
That's where they were, basically,
Right.
stewards.
right. And also, just from the sheer concussion and the fires and stuff, some of the men immediately, were either blown off or started jumping off just for their own safety into the water. As the ship continues to plow forward at 17 knots, it starts sinking, and it starts to lift, starts to turn. Captain McVeigh jumps into action immediately, starts taking assessments, barking orders, having somebody go, get some information, bring it back to him, and sometimes those officers would never return, he never saw them again. Minute number 8 in his ordeal, he orders abandon the ship because he realizes there's nothing they can do to save this. So the official word is put out, and the boys start leaving in droves. Luckily in San Francisco, they'd been boarded accidentally with a double order of life jackets. So many more got life jackets than probably would have, and they started going off the ship as quickly as they could. And a lot of them describe being out in the water, and there's the ship's on fire, and it's exploding, blah, blah, blah. And they said they swam out as far away as they could, as fast as they could, because they didn't want to get sucked under as the ship was pulling down. But they said they watched the eeriest sight they'd ever seen, because their home was standing straight on end with the screws turning, and it went down. And then it was gone. So you've got a whole bunch of boys in the water now, but only about 900 of them, because they estimate about 300 never made it off. Either they were too low in the ships to make it up in time, injured in the blast, whatever, but there were about 300 that didn't survive the initial sinking attack. When the ship sank, part of the damage was that it leaked thousands of gallons of bunker oil, which is a really thick, caustic, sticky oil. And that coated the top of the ocean all around them. So when the boys jumped off, or however they were able to get off that ship, some of them actually walked off over the hull, the bottom of the ship. They ended up in this oil. Did you end up in the oil, Don?
Oh, yes.
Clarence, both of you? Okay. So they've got this, and some of the boys, went off just so in so much turmoil that they ingested some of it, which immediately induced vomiting. And they're retching in the water and trying to survive and swim and don't know what they're going to do. And they tried to find each other. Now, Don remembers it being deathly quiet where he was as soon as the ship went down, because they were afraid that the common practice back then was that the submarine would surface and strafe the survivors who were able to get off. So where he was very quiet. Clarence, do you remember any noise that first night?
Just people yelling back and forth to each other.
Right, okay, and that did happen. They're trying to locate each other because you didn't want to be out there alone. The biggest, scariest thing in the world, to be out there in the middle of the ocean alone. And then there are also the screams. A lot of the survivors remember the screams from the boys who were injured in the water. So night goes on, comes into daylight for the first day, Monday. Go ahead. Guess who shows up? Sharks. What are the sharks there for? Why would they be attracted to this? There's a lot of blood in the water. There's a lot of blood from the boys who are bleeding, who are injured. There's a lot of blood from the body parts that were from the boys that didn't survive the blast. They show up, and also they've done studies, they also figure it was also from the booms from the ship sinking, or from the explosions, and also as she went down into the Marianas Trench, of course the pressure just crushed. And the air bowls had released and stuff, they figured that they were also attracted by that. So the sharks showed up in droves and just started a feeding frenzy. Well, where the boys had already started trying to find each other, this just immediately made them firm up into groups even faster. Because what they found out was that if you're in a big group together, you weren't near as likely to be attacked as if you were one lonely swimmer out here alone. Because you looked like a little injured fish to a shark. Every once in a while, though, they said that in their groups, somebody in the middle or along the edges would just be pulled under, use attacked. But more than likely, it was on the outer edges or off in the water alone. That's what they had to deal with in day one. There were very few of the rafts that made it off the ship. Captain McVeigh did make it off, and the first thing he encountered in the water when he abandoned ship was a potato crate. And he said he hung onto that potato crate until he was able to get to the raft where he found some of the guys. So he did survive. There were also floater nets, and those were basically cork. Were they round, Don? Clarence, were they round?
Well, sorry, they're oblong.
Oblong, and then they were woven with the rope in between them. And so
We had the injured on them.
right, they put the boys who were unable to swim, the ones who weren't probably going to last very long anyway, into the floater nets, and then those who were healthier hung onto the edges outside, and they stayed in their groups there too. Okay, go ahead. So Monday night comes and goes. Tuesday morning, day 2 in the water. Sharks are still there. This man is named Cozell Smith, and in all the research that I've done, he's the only man that I've been able to substantiate survived an actual shark attack and live to tell about it. On day 2, he was hanging on the side of one of those floater nets, and a shark came up and grabbed him by his left arm, right up to about his wrist area, and yanked him under, right off that floater net. And started to drown him. Started to, they spin, they work you back and forth. And he said he was down there just fighting as hard as he could with all of his might. And he was punching the shark's nose and punching the shark's nose. It wasn't phasing that shark at all. He said at one point he slid his hand along the snout until he found a really soft spot, and he jammed his fingers as deep in there as he could. It was a shark's eye. Well, that shark didn't like that, and it let go. And Cozell said he swam as fast as he could with his mangled arm back up to the surface, got over to that floater net, and literally threw himself up and into the middle of those injured men, got got out of that water. While he was up there, he said a moment later he realized, oh my gosh, what's happening? There was another sailor on top of him screaming and had a little knife and he's stabbing at him. Get off, get off, get off, get away, get off. Why did he want him off the floater net? That's right, he's bleeding. He's really bleeding. And they didn't want him on there attracting the sharks. And so he said he had but a moment to think in his head. And he said, you know, I can stay here in the middle of this floater net and die for sure because this guy's going to kill me. Or I can get back off into the water and take my chances. And he jumped back in. And his friend helped him take off his shirt and bandage up and turn up his arm, and he survived. And the little they've been able to find it dead. Day 2 is also the day that they were due to arrive in Leyte, and they never did, obviously. Well, what had happened, the problem with that was the young man who was working the plotting board that day in Leyte went out and noticed that the Indianapolis had not come in. And at the time there was a standing order that you did not report the arrival of combatant ships. We wanted to keep the information flow as minimal as possible so that Japan didn't know where everything was because we're still at war. So if the ship arrived safely, great, don't report it. Well, this young man thought when the Indianapolis didn't come, he thought it had probably been diverted, sent somewhere else, and he wasn't of a high enough rank to know that. And he kind of thought to himself, he said, well, if we don't report the arrival of combatant ships, we probably don't report the non-arrival either. So he took the Indianapolis off the plotting board, and at that moment she completely disappeared on the face of the earth. Nobody was tracking her at all. Okay, go ahead. Now this whole time that they're in the water temperature isn't up to their body temperature, so they're getting a slight case of hypothermia setting in slowly but surely. Their limbs and extremities are starting to swell, and they're starting to have some psychological breakdown because this is their 3rd day in the water without any fresh water, without any food. Several of them have been injured. So many by this time had already passed away and died. And this man, Dr. Lewis Haynes, ship's doctor. If you ever get to watch documentaries with this man, I dare you to watch it and not choke up because this man had the worst job involved on that ship. He was there to save the boys. He finds himself in the water, unable to do a darn thing for anybody. And he said in one of the documentaries, and it's just the most haunting line, he said, I wasn't a doctor in the water. I was a coroner. He said the boys would have somebody who they thought was dead who had passed away. And they would yell, hey doc, come over here. Is this guy gone? And he'd swim over to where they were. Because he started out in a group of about 400 guys. That first day. He'd swim over there and he'd open up the young man's eyelid and he'd tap on it. And if the pupil responded at all, then he was alive. But if it didn't, he pronounced him dead. And at that point, he would take off the young man's dog tags. Everybody knows what dog tags are? They're the ID, the little metal IDs. And he would put that on his wrist because he's going to go back when they're rescued. He's going to go and talk to every family and let them know your son did pass away in the water. I did say the Lord's Prayer. And we gave him a prayer release. So he started to collect these dog tags on his arm. And they would push the body as far away as they could. Well, on day 3, Dr. Haynes said he reached the low point of his time in the water, even though he was still in for 2 more days after this. He said on day 3, he'd been to so many boys and proclaimed so many of them dead that the dog tags were weighing his arm down. They were starting to pull him under. And he said he realized he had to make a decision to take those off and let them go to the ocean floor, knowing full well he would not have the names to go back to the families and tell them what he knew. And he did that. And all he wanted to do was save these boys as best he could. He was unable. And now he couldn't even go home and tell the families. And also day 3 was when we saw the psychological break amongst the men. They'd been in there with dehydration, like I said, without the food, with the sharks bumping their legs, with the screams at night, the body parts around them, never knowing what was going to happen in the next 5 minutes. And they started to hallucinate at that point. When you hallucinate, in a group, with a group around you who is in as bad shape as you are, the problem is that several of your friends can see the same hallucination. Some of the boys would see an island off in the distance. There was no island off in the distance. And they would see this and they'd say, oh, hey, there's an island over there. And there's hula girls with pictures of ice water. Let's go. And 4 or 5 of them would swim off toward this island because they all saw it too. And the other buddies back, who stayed back, watched them either drown or get pulled under by the sharks as soon as they left the group. The other thing that started happening is they started to kill each other. More than once in the groups, they had it happen where a man would call out, I got a Jap here, I got a Jap here. And he's talking about his buddy, his friend. And the other friends around him would come over and they'd either knife him or they'd drown him. So at this point, a lot of the big group would splintered off. You didn't have any of that around you, Don?
No.
See, Woody James did, and Woody James and his best friend, Jim, from Arizona, I forgot his last name now, that's when they left. I mean, they got the heck out of Dodge, because they said, we knew that, things were going to hell in a handbasket.
What do they call that, murder, and I don't remember.
Right, but there's also but when you're that broken, you're kind of not responsible for what's going on. Right. We have another survivor who remembers talking face to face with one of his friends, and he said, I'm not going to survive this. You want me to baptize you? And he said, sure. So his friend baptized him out there in the middle of the ocean. And he looked at his friend and he said, well, since we're probably not going to survive this, you want me to drown you? And he said, yeah, and he did. He drowned his best friend. He remembers that. Also, they started to drink the salt water, day 3, because they were so parched. And if they gave in to that temptation and drank the salt water, they only had about 2 hours left to live. And how come you can't drink salt water? It does dehydrate you. Your body cannot process the level of sodium in salt water. If they drank it, if they gave in and gulped that salt water, a chain of events started happening internally in their bodies, which resulted in the rest of the guys watching, one of the most horrific ways to die. They would start to shake, and then they would start to convulse, which is shaking really hard, to the point where they would even do somersaults and flips in the water. They would start to foam a brown substance out of their nose and their mouth. And then their eyes would roll over in the back of their heads and the whites, and they would go catatonic and die. So as best as they could, they tried to prevent each other from drinking the salt water. That was day 3. Things were very, very bad. Go ahead. Day 4. We're in the water. The majority of the men have already passed away, like I've already explained. There happens to be a crew of a PD-1 Ventura bomber. And it's led by the man in the upper right-hand corner here. His name is Chuck Gwynn. And he's out flying over the South Pacific testing a brand new antenna. It's a sock antenna and it keeps malfunctioning. And he's having a heck of a time. So at one point he's out there flying over and he hands over the controls to his co-pilot and he goes back there to mess with it himself. And he said at one point he's down there working through the bomb bay doors, messing with this antenna, and he focuses past his hands onto the seafloor below. And he sees a big black smudge, which would be the oil. That's right. You know what he knows it is? Immediately he knows in his heart of hearts that that is a disabled Japanese submarine, because he knows there's nobody else in the water right there. So that's got to be a Jap substance that's under there, sneaking around. So he jumps up, arms everything in his plane, drops altitude, and makes the first bombing run to drop the depth charges and finish the submarine off. And as he gets down there over the site, he sees something in the water. He sees little heads, he sees little arms splashing and waving. And he's going, and he calls off the bomb. And he's going, holy moly, we've got guys in the water here. And as he keeps on going, he realizes that there are too many in the water to be subcrew. This has got to be a ship. Well, now he doesn't know what to think because he'd read everything, all the communiques that morning before he left the island. There were no ships in that area, and there were no sinkings on either side. Who the heck is this? Well, he doesn't know, but he calls for an SOS. He calls for rescue. And he swings back around. And I don't know if either of you guys saw this. Chuck Gwynn comes back around, drops altitude again, and does this.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I see it.
I see you. Exactly. Do you remember that moment?
Oh, definitely.
That
He's our angel.
That's right, he's your angel. That's right. He said, I see you. And at that moment, that kept some of those guys going. Because until it, L.D. Cox from Texas says that when he saw Chuck Gwynn do that, he goes, the hair stood up on my head back when I had hair. So he calls for the rescue crews, and one of them, I guess, the SOS calls, go ahead, next picture. This is Chuck Gwynn shortly before he passed away, and that's a picture of his PB-1 Ventura. Now this plane, I need to point out, cannot land on the water. Okay, it's strictly a submarine hunting bomber. But one of the guys on one of the neighboring islands that receives the call, go ahead, next one, is a man named Lieutenant Adrian Marks. And he is the pilot of a PB-Y, and that can land on the water. So he decides, without any okay from his boss there on base, he and his crew are jumping and going, and they do. They jump in their plane, and they take off toward the site. About halfway there, they get an incoming message from back at base from his commanding officer. He says, don't you dare land that plane. You get out there, you map, you plot, you tell us where things are, what to expect, where to go. You are on a fact-finding mission only, because we cannot have any open sea landings. They're too risky, fatal. We're not going to risk equipment or lives. You just go out there and plot. So he gets out there. Okay, go ahead, next picture. He gets out there with his PB-Y, and he's over a group of men as he's getting down all the coordinates of where they all were, and he witnesses a bloody shark attack going on below him because he's down that low. And at that moment, he said, there was nothing else I could do. He picked up his mic and he said, I am landing this plane. And he slammed that bird down as fast as he could. He bounced 3 times, popped bunches of rivets, the scene started taking on water, and his men opened up those doors and started scooping those survivors in as fast as they could get them out of that water. Filled up the entire interior of the PB-Y. These men are just in horrible shape. And it was also the very first time that anybody knew who they were, because they said, we're from the Indianapolis, what took you so long? You know, they're in the interior of the airplane there. He looks out and there's still shark attack going on. They're still eating guys. And he said, I can't sit here and watch this. So he orders his men to go to the aft part of the plane where their emergency provisions are, and they grab their parachutes. And they bring those, and they start grabbing the guys out of the water. Now mind you, these guys are so psychologically gone that a lot of them are fighting rescue. They think that these are Japanese. And they don't want to be taken prisoner because they've heard the horror stories. They don't want to be picked up by these Japanese. They're actively fighting getting put into this plane. Well, he ended up taking these men out, wrapping them mummy style in the parachutes, tying them onto the top of the wing. And because he went that extra mile, he saved 56 men that day who probably wouldn't have survived. And there's a gentleman, one of the survivors said he doesn't remember being rescued. The only thing he remembers is waking up tied to the top of the airplane. Doesn't know how he got there. They then offloaded those men into one of the rescue ships that showed up on scene and sunk the plane because it wasn't flyable anymore. So the ships do show up. Go ahead, next picture. The ships show up, and this is a painting by an artist named Mark Churns. He's depicting the USS Bassett, picked up by the Bassett,
Right.
picked up by the Bassett. And it's also kind of meshed in with another story. There was another ship called the USS Doyle. And as it became nighttime in the rescue, not everybody's picked up because they're spread out over miles and miles. You know, the current had taken these boys every which way, depending on if they were in a raft, in a floater net, or in a life jacket. Well, the Doyle, Graham Plater, who was the captain at the time, only 26 years old, in charge of a ship, he realized that there were still boys out there that they weren't going to get to that night, and he went, I've got to give them something to go by. So he, in a time of war, put his spotlight straight up in the air and turned it off. Did either of you see that?
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Clarence?
That took a lot of guts to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Clarence told me the other night that he didn't think he was going to survive one more day, and the only reason he did is because he saw that light. That kept him going until they picked him up on that 5th day. This is an LCVP. This is a young man depicted named Peter Wren, who was on the Bassett, and he's reaching over to get the boys out. One thing I need to point out, the life jackets that the men went off the ship with were made of a fiber called kapok. And kapok is actually a tree, and it was the shreds of fiber that were buoyant, but they were only rated to be floating for about 48 to 72 hours. That's 2 to 3 days. These guys were in 4 days and 5. After 2 to 3 days, this fiber starts to actually absorb the water, which means it makes the jackets heavier and drags you down. Some of the boys early on, so scared that they were going to slip out of their life jackets, had tied huge mongo knots, and they couldn't get along. Now they're going to drown them. By the time these guys showed up on the scene, many of them were chin, lip deep. They were just fighting not to swallow the seawater when they got rescued. One of the funny stories is, as Peter's pulling some of the guys out, some of the boys over here on the flutter nets won't come get rescued, like I said, because they're still stuck delirious. They're hanging on the flutter nets. This man, Bill Van Wilpie, 19-year-old football player, fresh out of high school, decides he's had enough of this foolishness. He jumps off of the LCVP, swims over here to the floater net, and he goes up to these guys who were half crazy and out of their head, and he goes, "Hey guys, there's a dance over here. There's girls." They followed him right. Then he would go back over there and he'd get to the next room. He goes, "Hey guys, it's payday. They're handing out the money over here." And they'd go get rescued. He did that from about midnight till 6:30 in the morning. He helped save a lot of guys. One thing that really traumatizes Peter Wren to this day when he talks about the rescue when we do his presentation on this stuff is he says that after 5 days in the water, it'll do stuff to your skin because that is such a caustic brine. First off, these men in the life jackets, you're bobbing and you're moving and you're swerving and you're swaying, and those life jackets are not soft. They dug in down to the bone and gave them what were called saltwater ulcers, huge holes in their skin and muscle and tissue. Also, for a lot of the boys, it softened up their skin so much to be in this mixture of chemicals that when Peter and the other men who were doing the rescue would reach over to try and grab them by their arms, and the guys would reach up, they would actually separate their skin and rip, leaving muscle and tendon and bone there. So he said they had to be real careful with how they brought those boys up and forth. And then they would take them over there and float them off. And then they take care of them. They took care of them like little babies because they were in such dire condition. They gave these soaked, half-dead men their own bunks, their own clothing, their skivvies, everything. They even got into the shower with them to help clean them off and took just good care of them. Okay, go ahead. That's the rescue. Now, there's a picture of one of the oil-covered sailors. Now, when the ship was hit, there were 1,197 men on board. 5 days later, when they were rescued, how many were left? 317. 3/4 of the crew didn't survive. Only 1/4 did. Okay, go ahead. When they were taken back to the different islands and hospitals to recuperate, the Navy realized, and heard what had happened, that they were going to have to answer some pretty tough questions from about 900 dead boys' families. How the heck did you do the ship for 5 days? So they started doing interviews and talking to the boys, and in all of their investigation, they decided that the person to blame was Captain McVeigh. Go ahead next. So they brought him up on charges, court-martialed him. They charged him with 2 things. The first was they charged him with failure to order a timely abandoned ship. 12 minutes, he ordered it at minute number 8. He was found not guilty of that. The second one was failure to zigzag. He wasn't zigzagging. It was at his discretion, but it was for 10 minutes at midnight. They still found him guilty. Next picture show. They even brought the commander of the submarine over to testify against Captain McVeigh. And Hashimoto, who was completely flabbergasted by the whole proceedings because he could not understand why we were prosecuting a captain of a ship for the loss, which has never in history happened before. He actually said in his testimony he wasn't zigzagging and it wouldn't have mattered because I would have sunk him anyway. And they totally disregarded his testimony, and Captain McVeigh was court-martialed. Took him off command of any sea vessel ever again. Gave him the next job. Okay, go ahead. And his wife Louise, who he loved very, very much, her new position in life became to be a mail censor. Meaning, at Christmas time, because there were 900 families, some of those people had needed, and it's human nature, I get this, to blame somebody. The Navy had given them Captain McVeigh. And they wrote him letters, especially at Christmas time, that would say, "Dear Captain McVeigh, Merry Christmas, thank you for killing my son. You know, happy holidays, how can you celebrate while my husband is lying dead at the bottom of the ocean because of you?" Well, his wife would intercept these before he would ever see them, and she would get rid of them, hide them away. Time moves on, the men, as soon as Captain McVeigh was court-martialed, the guys were said, "Oh, no, he wasn't responsible for this. He actually saved a bunch of us out there that were with his rap group. You know, this wasn't his fault. You guys lost us. You know, this wasn't his fault." But, you know, at that point, back to that era, you just kind of moved on and got on with your life, right? There was no PTSD, there were no activist groups. You just went down with your life. And that's what they did. In 1960, or actually in 1959, there was one of the survivors who's still living down in North Carolina, was having a real hard time. Really, really hard time getting past this. Here it is, all these years later, 15 years later. And he just can't get past it. He was in a raft. He had barely survived, but only by the grace of God and another man on his raft who took care of him, named Giles McCoy, who was a Marine. And Felton Outlet could not get Giles McCoy off his mind. So one day, he told his wife to get a babysitter, get in the car, and they drove 900 miles to come up and meet Giles. Didn't tell Giles he was coming. Knocked on Giles' door, and when Giles opened it, he just started sobbing. My little Felton Outlet to this day cries anytime we talk about anything about the ship. But he just collapsed into Giles' arms and said, thank you for saving my life." They then went in the house and talked for the whole entire rest of the day. And from that encounter, Giles realized, we need to talk about this. So he actually organized the first survivors reunion here in Indianapolis in 1960. And they invited Captain McVeigh, who was really nervous about going because he was worried that since the Navy and basically the lost at sea, a bunch of the lost sea families blamed him, that maybe so did his men. And he didn't want to go, but he was talked into going. And when he showed up, Don said that he walked into the room, and what'd they say?
Captain on board.
Captain on board. And immediately, what'd you guys all do?
Come to attention.
As he did, he came straight to attention. Saluted him. He said it was the most tender moment in his life. He knew that he wasn't hated by his men who he tried so hard to keep alive. The second survivors reunion in 1965, or at that reunion, the men asked him, they said, please, we're trying to get you exonerated. Please let us, continue trying. And he said, you know what? It's gone. It's over. Let's leave me. 1965, the second reunion is held. Captain McVeigh can't go because his wife, Louise, passes away of cancer. At that point, Captain McVeigh starts getting his letters. He starts getting those Christmas cards. November 6th, the first one came in from one of the families. It was pretty vicious. And he got it. And he couldn't take it anymore. And he was alone. He missed Louise. And about lunchtime, he walked out onto his front porch. His service revolver with a little toy soldier that he had been given.
Full uniform, by the way.
In full uniform. He laid down on his front porch and he shot himself in his head. And every man on that ship will still tell you today that that was the last man that the Indianapolis took down. And boy, did that fire these boys up again. When they heard about the suicide of Captain McVeigh, they were furious because they know why he killed himself. It wasn't just the loss of sea families, it was the Navy having blamed him. And they started fighting and fighting again. They wrote the letters to the senators, the congressman, the president, anybody. Nobody responded back. Did you guys ever get a response back?
Not really.
Yeah,
no.
nothing, nothing. Yeah, just move on, just forget. Well, fast forward to 1996, go ahead. There's a young man in Pensacola, Florida. His name is Hunter Scott. He's 11 years old. He's watching a movie with his dad. How many of you have seen this movie? All right, we're going to watch a little bit of it right now. Can I have all the lights on? Hold on, technical difficulty. Sorry, new computer.
What's that one? What? That one there, on your arm. Oh, it's a tattoo. I got that removed.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. Mother.
What is it? So, that's the USS Indianapolis.
You on the Indianapolis?
What happened? Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, Chief. It was coming back from the island of Tinian to Leyte, just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. The vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer, you know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the to the tail. What we didn't know was our bomb mission had been so secret, no distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us overdue for a week. Very first night, Chief, sharks come cruising. We formed ourselves into tight groups. It's kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was, shark comes to the nearest man, that man he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces. You know, by the end of that first going, lost 100 men. I don't know how many shocks, maybe 1,000. I don't know how many men, they average 6 an hour. On Thursday morning, Chief, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson from Cleveland. Baseball player, Wilson's mate. I thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up. Bobbed up and down in the water, it was like a kind of top. Upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist. Noon the 5th day, Mr. Hooper, Lockheed Ventura, so she swung in low and he saw us too. A young pilot, a lot younger than Mr. Hooper anyway, he saw us and he come in low, and 3 hours later, a big fat PBY comes down and started to pick us up. You know, that was the time I was most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went in the water. 360 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
Alright. So young Hunter's watching that with his dad, and when he sees that part, he stands up in front of the TV and he goes, did that just happen, or did that really happen, Dad? And his dad goes, you know, I think it did. And you're doing a history fair project. Why don't you do a little research and see if you can find out. Okay, next picture. So what Hunter did is he put out an ad in his local paper and responded from one Maurice Bell, who lived over in Mobile, Alabama. And he drove over and he met Maurice and he showed him his Purple Heart there and asked him lots of questions, and Maurice told him about what happened to Captain McVeigh as part of the story. And before he left, he gave Hunter a list of all the addresses, names, and phone numbers of the survivors so that he could contact them for his project too. So Hunter went home and he wrote a letter to the men. And he basically asked 4 things. He said, what'd you do before the war? Where were you from? What'd you do? What were your duties on board the ship? How on earth did you survive in that water? What did you experience? 4th, what do you think about your captain's court-martial? Well, some of the survivors, even at this time in 96, couldn't talk about what they'd been through. A lot of them still have a really hard time. But the ones who would write back, wrote back, and boy did they write. They wrote about what they'd done before, what they did on the ship, what happened to them in the water. But when they got to that 4th question, they went crazy. They were still so mad all these years later about their captain being blamed. And they started sending Hunter for his project tons of stuff. They sent him photocopies and actual orders. They sent him dog tags. They sent him photographs, memorabilia galore to use for his project. Okay, go next. And this is a picture of him in front of his project there. And to make a long story short, it ended up getting the attention of a local politician who read about what happened to Captain McVeigh. And he took Hunter and all of his evidence and documents and everything, and took this kid up to Washington, D.C., and for the next 4 years, they lobbied Congress to get Captain McVeigh exonerated. Go ahead. Next picture. This is a picture of Hunter with Joe Scarborough, the man that helped him. This is Hunter with some of his collection. And this is Hunter up talking to the media. You know, I don't know if any of you remember this happening. It was in the late 90s. I remember reading about it in 1999. Some kid, some ship. I didn't know anything about it. I just thought, wow, that's kind of weird. Well, you know, he had serious media attention. Go ahead, next one. He was in People magazine. Next one. He was on David Letterman. He was on Tom Brokaw. Like I said, I read about him in my local paper back in Utah when I lived there. And boy, this kid just got the attention and got the spotlight on it, where these men had been trying to do the same thing for 50 years, almost 60 years. Well, in 2001, he was finally able to go up against the Senate Armed Services Committee along with a bunch of the survivors and his documents and a bunch of stuff he was able to get declassified. Go ahead. And they did get the captain exonerated. He was able to finally get it done. The Navy admitted captain was not at fault for the sinking of the ship. So, these are just a few of Hunter's grandpas. Not his grandpas. Okay, go ahead. You guys know any of those boys in that picture there, Don and?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. In 2000, the Discovery Channel funded a search for the ship. These are some stills from that. They took for the survivors. They took, who's that? Paul Murphy. Woody James.
I can't.
Oh, that's Big L.D. Cox,
God.
Texas. And Mike Carilla. Mike was just from Chicago, just passed away last year. They took them out over the side of the sinking on this search vessel. And they had a remote operated vehicle, an ROV, that they sent down there. And for the next 30 days, they searched. And they hit all kinds of weather delays, mechanical problems. But they did get the ROV down there a few times, but they never did locate the ship. But if you ever get a chance to see this documentary, it is by far the most powerful one I've ever seen. Because you've got the men over that site of where the 5 most hellish days in their lives happened. And they reminisce. And they really get choked up. In the end, what they ended up doing is they had brought out a granite marker that was inscribed to their men, to their comrades that didn't come home. And they put that over the side to mark for them. Okay, go ahead. Oh, this is my sweetheart. This is Eugene Morgan. He was my Seattle survivor, which is where I'm from. I'm flight attendant out there in Seattle. And Eugene and I used to do a lot of presentations. He's kind of a goofy looking guy. He was way goofier in personality too. And this is my bugler, Dan. He's back here. He likes to do our programs. We do them back there. I'm going to tell you a story that I didn't tell the kids at the high school today, and you'll understand why. Because we're all adults. Plug your ears right now. Eugene was one of the guys that was hanging onto the side of a raft. And he wasn't able to get into the raft until the evening of the 3rd day. At that time, and I asked him, I said, well, what happened in the 3rd day? And he said it thinned out. He couldn't say what had happened. You know, that meant enough boys in the center had died that they had to put them over. But until that, he said he was hanging on the side of that raft, and he thought he saw something off in the distance, bobbing on the waves. And he had everything in his body saying, swim for that. And so he did. He shoved off from the raft and he started swimming. And one thing I need to tell you is the ship went down at what time? Midnight. Shortly after midnight. Eugene had just gone to bed. He was sleeping topside on the deck because it was so hot underneath. And he was just dressed in just his skivvies, which are what? Underpants. Yeah, he was just sleeping in his underwear. So that's what he was in the water wearing. So anyway, he's swimming toward this imaginary box that wasn't there, out on the waves. He said when he got about halfway there, he heard the screaming from the guys in the rafts. Morgan, Morgan, turn around, shark! And the shark, fin, he sees slicing through the water right towards him. And he said, he remembers vividly thinking, this is my moment, this is when I'm gonna die. And the shark came up and it bumped him, which is what sharks do. They come up, they kind of test and see what you are. He kept on going. He flips around, as does the shark, does a U-turn. The fin's coming right back, and Eugene said at this point, he went, now I am dead. I am really, really dead. And he's telling this story in Seattle when we're doing a program, because one young boy stood up and he said, you know, did you see a shark? And he said, yeah, I saw lots of sharks. And he goes, did you get bit by a shark? And Eugene goes, well, let me tell you. I'm going, don't you start lying, G, because I know you didn't get bit by a shark. And he starts telling this story. As the shark came back in that U-turn, the shark came and he said he watched those jaws open and those teeth. He saw them right up on him to bite him, and it missed and it snagged his shorts. His skivvies were off. And then he goes, and you know, the only reason that I'm standing here today talking to you guys is because that shark didn't like Polish sausage and I'm Polish. That point I had to have a talk with him about where we can tell that joke. We do a lot of schools too, so yeah, he's a great guy. In 2008, to do a layover, like I said, I'm a flight attendant. I landed and I had a email from his daughter. She just sobbed. And I called her back and she said, Dad passed away this morning. Had a heart attack suddenly. I thought this man was going to outlive all of us. I mean, he was a fire. And so they asked me to come and speak at the funeral. So I got all, because he liked it when he liked the girls, I'll tell you what, he liked when I dressed in vintage. So I dressed up and I came and I spoke at his funeral. And afterwards, we were all sitting around with the family, and then he has a grandson, Jason Whitty, who's in the Navy, and he serves on board a nuclear sub. And Jason said, you know, I'm going to ask my commander if sometime if we happen to be out over the site in the area of the sinking, if I can take Grandpa's ashes and scatter them over the ocean with his buddies out there. And we're all just kind of going, as if the Navy's going to let you do that on a nuclear sub. Go ahead, next one. This is October, that same year. They surfaced, they did the most beautiful ceremony you've ever seen. And this is Jason taking his grandpa to be with his friends. That's right. Yeah. I miss Eugene somehow, I'll tell you what. Okay, next one. This is 2004, the very first presentation I ever did with the survivors. This is the first survivor I ever met, Woody James. And this is young Hunter Scott, who went and grew up on us. He's about to turn 20 years old right here. I brought him out and he spent a week with me and my family. We did these presentations and I took him mountain biking in Moab, Utah. Had a great kid. Okay, go ahead. And this is Hunter today. Guess what he did? He went and joined the good boy. We love our Hunter. So at this point, I want to kind of turn things and kind of bring it back around to not only are we here to honor these two gentlemen who went above and beyond, survived the unimaginable, things that I'm sure that they will probably still never speak of, no matter what horrific stories we hear, we know there's probably more. But also, for this man. When Arlene walked into the auditorium this morning, and she's wearing an Indy hat, I just thought maybe she was a relative of Clarence's, because all of his sons showed up in hats. And she came and sat by me and she said, that's my brother, he's lost his seat. And this is who we do these programs for, because these boys don't get to tell their stories about what they didn't survive. What they do know is her brother got with another survivor who lives in Texas named Cletus Lebo. And at some point in the water, they got separated. And Clarence is good friends with Cletus too, because they spent a lot of liberties together. But as she said a little bit earlier, the Doyle ended up picking up the remains of her brother and doing a burial at sea. It is for this boy and these men that we do these programs and tell their stories to remember. And for you kids, because of what these guys did and delivered that bomb that ended the war, your great-grandpas didn't have to go to Japan, and they survived. And you're not speaking Japanese today, and you're not speaking German today because of what these kids did back in the 1940s. And God bless them, everyone. Play a little tribute to them, and after that, I would like you to all rise as we play tap for Forrest and the other 880 who didn't survive.
Some men live and some men die. He was a better man than I, or would have been, we were boys. We were nearly 1,200 souls, watching how war takes its toll. It hates to watch the young grow old, it seeks and it destroys. Tinian bound to deliver the end from above the ground. Never knew a thing, never heard a sound. Got her there on time. Then we pushed pushed off for more torpedoes from the ocean floor. Cut us in two with a mighty roar and war was a cry. Captain says, boys, we gotta go. A 900 jumps, water below. Those that could not see still could hear Indianapolis when she disappeared. We thought they'd come when the sun, the sharks they gathered in the world it froze. 10-footers from the tail to the nose. Well, this was not war. Some boys thrashed, some they pressed, some were bit in half, some were left alone. All we had to give was bone. Tell me, what are you fighting for? For 4 days we died, some floated away when the night flew by. Others with madness cried, I can still hear the sounds. Calls for loved ones in the air, and whoops for things that just weren't there. Chattering teeth and the Lord's Prayer with the devil all around. That PV-1 finally came, called the PVY, and the ship's the same. About luck in war, 'cause we weren't exactly what they were looking for. 375, so there's that many men asking why. How do I live when I watch men die? Where do they all go? You may seek to blame, state your case, make your claim, stick your ass up in the game, because you'll never know. Now I'm an old man, still never got further than the sand. Dreams can bring me back, force my hand like it was day. I put a seashell to my ear, grandson says, Papa, what do you hear? So he can't see the tears until they say. Captain says, boys, we got 900 jumped into the water. 300 survived, so there's that many men asking why. Who on earth knows why? Some men live and some men die. He was a better man than I, or it would have been. We were just boys.
Good job.
here to also represent the men that will never be their comrades that didn't come home. We have Clarence Hershberger here from the USS Indianapolis and Don Beaty. And at this time I want to bring them up here, and you are welcome to ask them anything that you would like. You can get some clarification on anything you want to know. Can you what? You can do whatever you want.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Bring this
Oh,
up
no, you're good.
because you've done a wonderful with this.
Thank you.
But did you know about the
Did I know about
Did your
that?
research ever tell you about the first court martial in Guam?
No, I have first court martial in
There
Guam.
was a court martial held in Guam when we were there. And the captain was completely exonerated there. That was in 1945. End of 45.
Mhm.
Well, then after
They did the one in DC.
and they took the one to DC.
Right.
Now, there's one thing, I don't know if you went this far, because it's politics. I think all people here know what politics are. And what had happened, I'm talking to a group of adults, and I'm gonna tell you something. In the time when my captain was court-martialed, and Admiral King was in charge, and the Department of, was, what did I say, the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
Forster.
Forrestal.
Yeah, Forster. Now, they didn't like captain to start with. I gotta tell you something that happened. King went to with the grandfather of my captain. And they didn't get along. And one of them was ahead of him, and the other one in that. So you know what happens in politics, don't you? So they didn't like Captain McVeigh. So they'd make an example of him, regardless whether the Navy was right or wrong. And that's exactly what happened. And us crew members knew that. But see, we couldn't do nothing about it. But that's what, but then it came on to the point where, I have to admit, people were very upset and they really took it out on our captain. I'm sorry that's the way it happened. That's what it is. Well, I thought I straightened out a little bit. Because anybody knows about politics, it's crazy what's around.
Well, that brings me to the point in the sea, back out in the water. We had the very first day, we had one guy in the crowd in our group. Because he wasn't on board ship anymore, he did not have to obey any officer or any of the Navy rules. He could do darn well, and so he did. But I'm telling you, he was so wrong that night pushed him under the water, and he died for his comments. Now this happened in my group. I recall it vaguely, but anybody that thinks that it's because he's not on base or on the ship, or whatever he's assigned to, does not have to go by the rules, is out of his mind. Just another case of politics.
Does anybody have any questions to start off with? Anything you want to clarify? Anything you wonder about the story?
Please, questions, because I'm.
You gotta stand up, you gotta talk loud, because you're old men. What?
Where did you two guys spend your 5 days? Were you on the raft or floating?
Mostly on a floating net and K-by jacket. But most of the raft was injured and burned. So we could hang on to the raft, but we very seldom got in them. But the float kept somewhat buoyant.
I don't know about you, but I wasn't injured.
Now, were you on the floater net too, Clarence? Okay.
it's a floater net ain't as big as this crewman diamond. It's a big cord all tied together is what it is. And they keep them in a big net hanging from a railing on, what do you call it, boat deck, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume fellows had nightmares for a long time. How long before they went away, or did they ever?
You don't, I can't exactly say they're nightmares. It comes back to you. You know what the strange thing is, see, I went no burns, no cuts, no nothing. So home, I went back to work. And I mentioned it to all the people I worked with for years. You know, most veterans don't talk about war. They're talking about the good times. And so, yeah, you can every day you went on furloughs and things.
Why didn't you take me along?
You're doing all right on your own. But to the Veterans Administration, I finally got an award. What do you call it? Because I'm Dutch or something. Anyway, 30%
Disability.
disability and problem, yeah.
You getting a check from the government?
Oh, yeah.
In the book, 317, I was always confused because one of the crewmen, the sharks would attack in the morning, and then another crewman in the same book, they would attack at night.
Well, he was in a like tank zone.
Well, I just wondered, did they attack all the time, or was there
There's no telling.
when they were going to?
Now, see all them chapters by a survivor, plus if they weren't here, their family would write it. But
Well,
now, I want to tell you this, because I even think this. There was a few good chapters by some of them, a little bit off,
was that right?
exaggerated, so you know, you can tell when somebody's exaggerating. I always do this when I'm in a bar, and I hear a guy popping up, I think, you sure he was there?
I went to that too.
I have a question. What did you guys do? I mean, you're out there for 5 days. I mean, from 6 a.m. to 2
Pretty
p.m.
much
Did you guys? I mean, but how did you keep each other awake?
I'll tell you what, we
Same.
weren't exactly. I'm sorry, we got pretty rough. It's one said when you heard it, knives. At a certain point, we made everybody throw all